Hello again everyone, and welcome to the first in what I hope will be a series of Photoshop and Illustrator and just generally Adobe related videos, tutorials, things. If you have anything you would want to see, just give me a shout. I will do my best, although let me just start off by saying I am by no manner of means an expert. I am always still learning. There's always new features that I find. I'm like, oh my gosh, why didn't I think of this before? Or why didn't I Google that before? It's my way of doing things that might help you guys, so just a little kind of warm-up session. So you'll see by the title, editing RAW photos. So if you don't know what RAW is, I'll get you started. So think of RAW like unprocessed film. So it's not in a darkroom, it's completely not processed at all. The camera hasn't done anything to it, no person has done anything to it, no one has touched it. It is completely raw. The point of a RAW file is you decide how it looks, not the camera. So when you shoot JPEG, the processor in your camera basically says, this is what I've been programmed to do, and this is what we're doing. Yeah, that's not always right, and you'll know that by computers always do what they think is right, and it's not always right. Now once you start to look at your images, you may think, why is that so dark? Or how can I get that brighter? How do you get a more shallow depth of field? Things like that. That's when you start going into kind of the mechanics behind photography. Hi Melody! So the only thing about a RAW file is post-processing for RAW files can only be done in certain software. Photoshop. I think there's a Corel program that does that, but I'll have a little check and get back to you guys on that. Now, RAW by no means is a file extension, it just means the type of file that it is. The extensions differ slightly by manufacturer, which I'll probably quickly put on the screen now so you can see it. In this video, what I'll be working with is .NEF files, which are Nikon's extension for RAW files. So now that we know what RAW is, how do you shoot RAW? Obviously DSLRs are your first and foremost choice. They offer the biggest range of compression, but you can shoot JPEGs as well as RAWs so that you have one that you can share, and that's your number one go-to. Some bridge cameras do shoot RAW, some compact cameras will shoot RAW. I know a lot of you use the Canon G7X. I believe that shoots RAW too. Correct me if I'm wrong, or what you can do is if you know your device shoots RAW, leave it down in the comments so everyone knows. Some smartphones do shoot RAW as well. I know Troy's phone, the Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge, that's a mouthful, that shoots RAW natively in the camera app. The iPhone doesn't, as far as I know. I have the iPhone 7 Plus that doesn't shoot RAW natively, but you can buy apps to shoot RAW, but I'm not too sure how this works or how you get them onto your computer or anything like that. I'm a bit sketchy about using them. Again, if you know of any that do genuinely work, I would like to know. It's not something really that most people think of. It just offers so much more flexibility than JPEG. Next we'll touch on the pros and cons of shooting RAW. We'll quickly run through the pros. It has more flexible editing. I'll show you later in the video. You'll see a little tutorial that I'll do. It'll show you how to work the functions in the RAW editor in Photoshop, which can make better images. It can also aid your learning as well, because then you can say, okay, my aperture was too open then. I need to close it back up so I can get a better view of what I'm focusing on. Also, when you're editing, it's non-destructive. Because the file is uncompressed, it is lossless. So JPEG is a lossy format, RAW is lossless. I'll leave a link in the description box below of a YouTube video, and it shows how lossy compression works. Lossy means you continue to open and save the file, which means the file degrades over time. It's called file degradation. I've personally experienced it, and it is a bummer. Like, I didn't realize at the time that I was maybe opening and saving, but it was actually on my Hawaii photos back in 2009. I had a Panasonic FH22. It was a good camera. I was trying to do edits on JPEG, and this is before I started getting into photography. I didn't know better, and I wish I did, because I love those photos and I've lost quite a few of them. Some of them I've managed to regain, actually edit out the degradation, but that's not always going to be possible for a lot of files, and I'm not sitting there going through hundreds of files that we take to fix them. It's always good to have RAW backups. I'll show you how to edit JPEGs further on in the video. You just don't have the flexibility to change things like you do in RAW. Also with RAW editing, you can fix chromatic aberration and barrel distortion. Chromatic aberration is when you get purple or green fringes around certain things. What I notice it with is if I'm taking a photo on a cloudy day and the white's quite blown out of the clouds and there's maybe leaves from a tree. So you'll get a kind of fringe around the leaves and it's really annoying. So with the RAW editing in Photoshop, you pretty much click a button, pull the slider to where you need it to go, what color range, and it disappears like magic. It's amazing. Barrel distortion, I think that's kind of self-explanatory. It's usually when you're using a wide angle lens, but you can notice it with just standard lenses as well. We've noticed it with the 50mm and the 35mm, sorry. The middle of your photo bulges, so then it's distorted all the way out. Now what the RAW editor does is it pulls the distortion back and straightens everything out, which is awesome. It does it by itself. You can play with manual sliders as well, but it's usually pretty spot on. I've never really noticed that it's been off. But then when you toggle it on and off, you see a huge difference between them, and it's like night and day. It's just a great invention. Last pro for now is it extends your memories. We take a lot of our photos on our travels. By the time we plan a trip, actually go on a trip and finish editing the photos, videos to go with our trip, those maybe span like 2 years. I'm not kidding, guys. Even though we're only away for 2 weeks, it drags on the memories so much longer, and I don't know, there's just something nice to come back and go through every one of your photos. Cons of RAW, it takes up a whole lot of memories. That can mean a lot more money spent on storage, so SD cards, hard drives, cloud storage, you name it. Files are just a lot bigger. Another con is they take time. You can't just shoot a RAW and happy days. You actually have to go through and edit it, and I personally think this is a pro, but a lot of people maybe don't have the time or don't want to spend the time going through individually each one of their photos. Con number 3, you cannot share a RAW immediately. If you are sharing on social media, it usually has to be a JPEG. I've not really come across any social media sites that will take anything but the standard JPEG, PNG. Usually the standard one is JPEG. Con number 4, your buffer will become fuller quicker, resulting in slower shooting. Your buffer is basically where the camera says, I need to stop and save these files, I can't do anything else. When you talk about frames per second on the camera, it's maybe 5 frames per second, so and then it'll stop until it's finished processing the files that it's got and saving them into storage, and then the buffer will be refreshed and you can start again. Obviously depending on memory card speeds and stuff like that can affect your buffer. Again, that kind of ties in with the first point that I made about storage. SD cards usually have to be a higher class so that they can take the right speed that the camera's trying to send the information to the SD card. Or it could be, it doesn't have to be an SD card, by the way. Memory card, shall we say, that's good. How do you edit RAW? A lot of people like to use Lightroom. I do not like it at all whatsoever. I don't know why, I just don't like it. Personally, I use Photoshop for editing all my RAWs. The Adobe package has actually become a lot more accessible in current years because of the subscription service that they offer. It used to be years ago you would pick up Photoshop for well over, when I worked in New Zealand, it was over $1,000 for the Photoshop package. Now it's a lot easier. You can get student discounts, you can get annual memberships, you can get monthly memberships, and you cancel when you want. However, I've never personally used it, but another program that can handle RAWs is Corel Aftershot. From the reviews I've read, it's just as good and it's cheaper. You know, if you're looking to just start out, maybe that's an option you could consider, but the coming tutorials will show you in Photoshop CC 2018. It's good to note that there are several different versions of Photoshop. So you have the CC version, which I have, which is, I don't know if it's replaced CS. CS was the highest you could get. It had a lot more features and functions. So I'm not too sure anymore if Elements still support RAW editing. That's maybe something I need to research right now. Okay, so good news. Elements does support RAW editing. I'm not too sure if the functions and stuff like that will be, I would guess, pretty much similar. If you're thinking about possibly buying them, I would definitely recommend CC if you can. If you can't, then I'd maybe go for Corel. just to get yourself used to things. It's your call. I'm not here to preach, I'm here to teach. I'm so lame. So here we are in Adobe Photoshop CC 2018. It probably looks a little bit intimidating to start out with, but don't worry about that, I'm going to help you through that. So first of all, I'll run down what images I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you an image that is extremely underexposed, and I'll show you that in JPG and in RAW so you can see the differences between the editing styles and functions, and how RAW has a lot more functionality when it comes to fixing things. I'll also show you a overexposed image which shows the chromatic aberration really well, and between both of them we should hopefully be able to see some of the barrel distortion as well that I was talking about earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and open my first file, which is the underexposed one, in a JPG. So if I go open with Photoshop, so the images I've plucked out have been from our trip to Paris in last year, 2017. This is a Buzz and Woody in the Lego store, and as you can see from the image, it's pretty dark, it's very yellow, and as you know if you've ever been into any Lego store, that's quite hard to avoid. And we're just going to go ahead and try and fix this. It depends if you have used or opened Photoshop before, but what I like to have open on here is my layers and my history. The layers aren't so important with editing photos the way I do it anyway. Usually it's just the history you want to look at. It can be helpful sometimes if you're jumping back and forth to maybe see what looks better or things like that. What I usually like to do is to balance out my colour and my levels. To balance out my colour, I press Shift, Command and B, just keeping in mind that I am on a Mac. I will put the Windows prompts on screen. And you can see that kind of brightens it up a little bit. I change my levels by pressing Shift Command L. That kind of takes out the yellowish tone. You can see it quite well from the background just here with the Tower of London set, and also with the Disney Castle over here on the left hand side. It's not perfect, but it's a start in the right direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove those, and to open my colour balance and balance it manually, I press Command B. That brings up this dialog box here. You can play around with the shadows, midtones and highlights. I'm just going to quickly go through this one. So it's very yellow, so what we want to do is add the opposite colour, which is blue. You can kind of play around with it and see what you think is best. It's not an exact art. I can't teach you exactly how to edit every image to get it perfect every time. It's a total personal preference, and you might find that it's helpful to jump between different settings to see how you like things, or even if you're working on images, save several versions of it because there's nothing stopping you from doing that. This one's pretty yellow, so I'm going to leave it about 39. Usually what I do is I use the directional arrows on the keyboard to make fine adjustments, but just for the sake of this tutorial I'm just going to pull the sliders around. Okay, on that applies that. And now I'm going to go for my levels, so Command L. If you see this graph here, the general rule of thumb is slider on your right hand side should technically be where the waves start. Again, not always accurate, generally. That's what's best. So that's already starting to look a bit better, I would think. I'm going to hit the OK on that. If I open up my levels again, I'm just going to talk you through the droppers on the right hand side of the dialog box. These can set your white balance from a black point, a grey or a mid-tone point, or a white point. You can choose different areas, like Woody's eyes are supposed to be black, but I don't usually find that I get great results from this anyway, so I like to pull the sliders. Man over here seems to be wearing grey, so he gives off an okay grey point, but I'm personally happier with that. Now I think it looks a little bit pink or red, so I'm just gonna pull the sliders to see what I think is right. So maybe about there. Just as well, you can make other adjustments. Just up here on the right hand side I have an adjustments bar. You can set your brightness and contrast and things like that. It's up to you. I don't really use these because I am in RAW most of the time, but you can play around with this, especially like vibrance and stuff like that. You have more control here. And apart from that, I'm just going to go ahead and save this. So it's just File, Save As, and I want to save it as a JPG. Just save it in the same folder. I'm just going to call this Edited. And we'll just compare them. So save. Image options, I usually just keep it at 12 max standard. Preview, is just the file size usually that shows here. So it'll be around 16.7 megabytes, I think that is, yeah. And just hit OK, and that saves that. Okay, so now I'm going to open the same image, but in the RAW file. So open with CC 2018, and that's our photo in RAW. It might take a little minute just to buffer in sometimes, depending on the speed of your system. Now you'll see that this has opened a different box. So this is the camera RAW editor. I'll just quickly run you through some of the functions and buttons that are on here. I'll eventually get around to this right hand side of the screen, but for now we'll just work at the top here. Zoom, pretty basic. Zoom, right click, you can change your zoom preference. Personally, I like to just fit it in view. Zooming in is pretty helpful if you're doing fine adjustments. If I zoom in again, we'll go to the hand tool. That just moves your image about. Your white balance tool will obviously set your white balance. It usually works off a midpoint, so a grey and neutral colour. Like I said before, thankfully this guy's wearing grey, so he should be able to set as a pretty good white balance point. You'll see if you click on different colours, it'll kind of distort the image quite drastically. The colour sampler will just tell you what colour is where on the image. So if you wanted to take the exact colour and make, I don't know, text from it or something like that. I've never really actually used this. There's quite a lot of functions I don't use in this, but I'll run through them and tell you why or why not. Targeted adjustment tool, basically just pick an area and pull it to your liking. Not something I use personally. The crop tool, pretty self-explanatory. Pull and guide the area, then hit enter if you want to keep it. Again, something not really that I use, but the next one is, this is the straighten tool. So if you have a horizon that's not quite straight, you can fix that. So this one's pretty good, but it's a little bit off center, so you'll see the difference there. A little bit better. The transform tool, you can skew the image how you wish. Again, not something I use majorly. This can help with your barrel distortion though. I personally don't use it. Spot removal, you can move the squared brackets on your keyboard to change the brush size. So if we choose this one here, it might pick, it's picked a different area. 4s, and if we let that apply. It's not the best fix, but it can help when you're doing very minor changes. Red eye removal, there's no eyes in this unfortunately, so we can't do it, but if you just pull and drag the box, it'll find your red eyes for you. Adjustment brush, you can play with the sliders over here to change just targeted parts of your image. Again, just use the squared brackets to change your brush size. So say I wanted this A here to be a little bit more exposed. Oh, and the temperature's down as well, so that will affect it as well, so it looks quite blue. Something that I don't really use. I don't know, personally I just don't really see any benefits in doing this. Others may think differently, but that's just my experience. The graduated filter works exactly the same way, only it will filter your image basically, depending on how you want it. So again, it can be helpful. I personally don't use it at all. And your radial filter, next one along, is basically the same. Again, not something I use. We open the preferences dialog, here we go. This is all your settings, so I'll run through the most obvious ones. Some of them are a little bit more advanced, and personally what I think is if you don't know what it is, leave it alone, or if you do want to know what it is, Google it before you mess with it. Okay, so in general we've got save image settings, and the camera raw database is what I have it at. The sidecar XMP files, that just means it'll be an additional file saved with your raw file with all your edits in it. Personally I like to just have them all in the one file so that I can access them and I don't have hundreds of additional files to go with my original photo. Apply sharpening to leave it on all images. The reason for that is because the camera hasn't done any edits at all to it, so your sharpening hasn't been applied automatically by the camera. That just helps to bring out some of the finer details. Your default image settings, apply auto tone adjustments. What that means is when you open up your files, they will be automatically set to auto on this right hand part of the screen. I haven't got there yet, but I'll show you what it does. Auto apply grayscale max when converting to grayscale. Pretty self-explanatory. If you have more than one serial number or ISO setting, you can make defaults according to them. Your cache is again pretty self-explanatory. I have it set as 5 gig in a folder saved on my in-computer hard drive. It's up to you. If you find that the images aren't loading too well, maybe reduce your cache or try purge it. Your DNG file handling, ignore your XMP files if you have saved them in that general dialog box. And you can update JPEG previews if you want to. I'd leave that off. JPEG and TIFF handling, just leave that automatically set. And performance, that's just your processor. So just hit OK on that, nothing's changed. Next button's along. Pretty self-explanatory again, rotate, nothing hard. You might see when I've been kind of hovering over the toolbar at the top here, the letters or keys in the brackets are shortcuts. So if you want to do red eye removal, you hit E on your keyboard and that will take you to that tool. Down the bottom left hand corner here we have your zoom level, again just the same as your right clicking. Save image, this is something I'll get into once I've finished editing this image. The text under your image is just the file name and extension. This part down here is just about your workflow. This is just default, I believe, so personally I would just leave that, especially if you're just starting out. These buttons down here will cycle you from before and after view. It'll cycle you between views so you can compare the images. Swap them around using this button next, and copy current settings to before, so it'll take your image back to what it was. If we go down here, open image, this will open it in Photoshop like we did with the JPEG. Cancel will cancel everything without saving anything you've done, or if you hit done, it applies the changes you've made and saves it into your XMP file or into the raw database, depending on what your settings are. Finally, before we get onto the main panel, this button up here, toggle full screen mode, go back to our default view. Now this graph up here you don't have to worry too much about, although you can make edits just here. You can see the slider in the blacks changing. So you got black, shadows, exposure, highlights and whites, so it goes from dark to light. You can make adjustments just by pulling this along. Personally, I do use the sliders down here to make changes. If we jump down to just below the histogram, you've got your aperture, your ISO, your shutter speed and your lens, and if it's a zoom lens, what focal length you use it at. Down here we have more settings, so you've got basic, tone curve, detail, HSL to grayscale, split toning, lens corrections, effects, camera calibration, presets and snapshots. I'll run through the ones that I do use. I'll quickly touch on the ones that I don't use. So in basic and in most of the tabs, these three lines are where you can reset your image back to what it was. So this is what it imported as with the auto function tick. So this is what the computer thinks is correct. If I hit that back to default, that's how my image was when it was first loaded in. White balance as shot, pretty self-explanatory. You can change it if you wish, or you can pull on these sliders to change it. I'm not going to go through any of these functions here. You'll see when we go through and edit the image. Your tone curve, personally I don't use this, but you can make adjustments as you wish. Detail, sharpening has automatically been applied. Like I was saying, in your general options, you're going to want to apply sharpening to all of your images because it's not applied by the camera. Noise reduction, again, if you've maybe shot with a higher ISO or anything like that, you can make changes here. HSL to grayscale, again, not something I particularly use. Your box here, convert to grayscale, will change your image to black and white. Your HSL, which is your hue, saturation and luminance, can really bring out the colours in your images. I don't use this much. Split toning, nothing I use, although you can skew your shadows. They're kind of tealy coloured, and then you could change your highlights so that they're blue. Lens corrections, we'll get into more detail about this, but anytime I load in any images, I always tick these two boxes, so remove chromatic aberration and enable profile corrections. So if you enable your profile corrections, it will automatically load in your lens profiles, so your make, model and the profile of your actual lens. You can change the distortion and vignetting as you wish. I usually just leave them at default because personally I think the profile corrections work pretty well. If we jump over to the manual tab, that just controls your bulge distortion and your defringing here, so you can change, this is to do with your chromatic aberration. You can set the amount of purple that you want to remove or the green fringes you want to remove. the hue and the purple or the hue and the green. Again, we'll go into more detail on that on the next image. Effects, dehaze grain, post-crop vignetting. I don't use this at all. Camera calibration, I just leave this all at default. I probably am missing something, but I don't have any presets or snapshots. So let's get on to the actual editing of the image. Now what I usually like to do is just hit auto if it's not already loaded in as auto and just see what the camera thinks and work from there. So again, this is a little bit yellow still for my liking, so I'm just going to bring that down a little bit. Exposure I think is a little bit overexposed as well, so I'm going to bring that down just a touch. Contrast I think could maybe do with a little bit of upping, maybe too much. Yeah, that seems good. Highlights, there's not too many highlights that I can see, maybe just bring it down a little bit. Shadows, I like to usually bring out the shadows. Whites, let's just have a play around with this one. Where was that was good. Blacks, I like to play and bring down the blacks so that they're even blacker than they are for some reason. I don't know why. I think that was good. Clarity, we'll bring up just a touch. Vibrance, silly gesture. I think we can get away with a little bit more vibrance. Although Woody's face is a touch yellow. Let me bring this white balance down a little bit more. It's better. I'm going to actually go into the HSL grayscale and bring the reds out a little bit more. So I think we're good with this. Going to go ahead and save this. So save image down the bottom left. We'll save it in the same folder that I used. Just leave it as edited raw. You can do this really cool thing with file naming. So you can leave it as a document name and then add several prefixes after that. So serial numbers, digits, letters, dates, you name it, it's there. File extension, like I was saying earlier, your typical one is JPG, just leave it as that. Format, again, is JPG. Leave the quality as 12, that's similar to the dialog box that pops open when you're saving a JPG. Color space, I leave alone. Sizing, again, I leave alone, but that can be helpful if you need to resize it to a certain width and height. I just go ahead and save that. And you see just down here on the bottom left it tells you how many is remaining and what's the status of it. It's saved, so if we hit OK. So here is our two edited images. This one was the original JPEG that was shot at the same time as this RAW. There's quite a big difference personally, I think. You might not see the difference, but I see a lot more colour. It's not as yellow, it looks a lot brighter and cleaner and just better in general. I'll just flick back and forth between them so you can see differences. Click done and I'll open up another few images. So if I import a few, you'll see how it looks. The couple of images I've loaded in are just here. You can see them on the film strip. If we just scroll through them, you'll see them. Now, what do you notice about this image with Goofy? So the background is extremely overexposed. I've noticed my friend chromatic aberration appearing. So you can see it, the purple fringing around his glove on the left hand side too. Also really bad with his eyes, just general his face, around his tooth, around his nose, his whiskers. It is just the bane of my life. I hate it. Although, if we enable our chromatic aberration tool and our profile corrections, you should be able to see that is dulled down a little bit, the chromatic aberration, but we need more. If I just pull this slider up a touch, you can see it start to disappear, which is fabulous. Just like that, it's gone. Just like that. So easy. Now if we hit auto, I'm pretty happy with the white balance as it is. It's overexposed, so I'm going to bring that down a bit. Contrast, I think we could do with a little bit more. Highlights, again we'll bring that down, or maybe turn the exposure up a little bit. Shadows, I like to play around with just so you can see the difference. That's okay. Whites I'll bring down to bring that background back to normal. Maybe up the shadows a little bit actually. There we go. And blacks, because I like the blacks, I'm going to bring it down a bit. This is a Disney image, so I believe that you can get away with a little bit more colour. Not too much, just a little bit. And that's Goofy done. Just make sure that chromatic aberration hasn't come back, or you might need to jump between and just keep checking that you're happy with it. There There we go, that's good. I'll show you before and after. What can I say? What a difference. What a difference. Yeah, that's why I love RAW. So much easier. So I'm going to show you one last image. Eiffel Tower. This is what I was saying about the high contrast areas. The purple and green fringing this time we have, our great friend. So if I pop that on, and we'll turn the purple up a little bit. Can we see it anywhere else? Maybe turn the green on, because I did see a little bit of green somewhere. But that looks pretty good. Do some quick color adjustments to it. I could have maybe spent a little bit more time just at the top here taking off the very overexposed top of the Eiffel Tower, but I really don't think that's necessary right now, but you get the general gist of it. Okay, so that's us for now. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please give us a thumbs up, and if you would like to see anything, please let me know in the comments below, because there's so much knowledge to photography in general and just Photoshop as well, and it's quite hard to drill down on what needs to be said. RAW is something I feel quite passionately about. It doesn't work in all circumstances, and I understand that, but it's just my personal favourite. And if you have any other tips, just please let me know, because I know I'm not an expert. I probably miss out on half the features that Photoshop has to offer, but that's just the way it is right now. This is how far I've got in the 10 years I've been using Photoshop, which is probably not very far. So I'll see you next time, guys. Bye!